All right, it is 3:05 and our webinar is going to begin. Thank you everybody for joining us today. This is Coronavirus Disinfection Technologies and Tactics. This is a webinar in the BioRAFT EHS Community Connection webinar series. This is a place where we try to help the EHS community come together and talk about pressing issues, discover and share best practices, and hopefully spend more time protecting everybody and less time reinventing the wheel. So I'd like to thank our three panelists for donating all their time and energy to join us today. Looking forward to a really great discussion here. And without any further ado, I'm going to go ahead and move on to our start slide. So just a quick note before we begin, for those folks who are joining us now, Zoom has a really helpful piece of functionality called the Q&A feature. This is a great place to ask the questions you'd like us to address in the live Q&A portion of the webinar in the second half, and it stops them from getting hidden. You can thumbs up the questions you're most interested in and respond to each other's comments and avoid, help to increase communication, have conversations, not wait for us to address things that you're interested in. So if we could just get started with a quick round the horn, have our panelists introduce themselves, where they're from, and talk a little bit about how they define disinfection, just to make sure that going forwards we're all on the same page about what we'll be talking about for the rest of the webinar. Aristea, would you begin?
Of course. My name is Aristea Lubar. I'm an Associate Biosafety Officer at the University of California, San Diego. And the definition of a disinfection that I offered up was essentially processing or treating materials such that most, if not all, pathogenic microorganisms are removed or rendered inactive.
And Megan?
Hi, I'm the Biosafety Officer at the University of North Texas in Denton, and I defined it as disinfection is the chemical or physical treatment that destroys the most resistant vegetative microbes or viruses, but not the spores, in or on inanimate surfaces. I've been the Biosafety Officer at North Texas for 2 years. Prior to that, I was at the CDC for select agents.
And Joan?
Thank you, Matt. Hi, everybody. Joan Wickersheim from UT Dallas. I am the Associate Director for Research, Campus, and Environmental Safety. So we have a broad range of tasks that we help our customers out with across the campus, including everything from start to finish when something arrives on campus to the time it leaves. So we have a good overview of what's going on in campus. It's a big project, it's a big task. So I will preclude everything here with, I don't know everything about anything. I do know a bit about a few things. So when it comes to disinfection, my definition includes some common sense language such as germs and things like that. Just trying to reduce the concentration of germs that might cause illness on surfaces or objects, specifically trying to prevent or mitigate the spread of disease during an outbreak.
Fantastic. And I love that point. We try to hit on that every webinar, that this is not a place to come for all your answers. That's why we have such a fantastic community of attendees here. You all are the experts as well, and we would love to have you share your knowledge as we're going through here. It's not about having all the answers, but man, do we have a lot of questions. So we're gonna go forwards here. It's a hugely broad topic. We're gonna try and cover as much as we can, and let's go ahead and move on. So these are some of the kind of broadest, most common topics around disinfection. We asked our panelists to send a few pros and cons, and I did my best to condense all of the really excellent comments that they sent me back into something that would fit on the slide. We're going to actually take their full comments and post those on the webinar page after the webinar is over for download. And we just want to have this up for reference as we are talking about all of these different technologies. So to kick things off, Joan, I had a question for you. So how do you find the balance between facts and publicity about what disinfection can accomplish? I think this is something we've all seen get touted really heavily and sometimes lead to perhaps a misallocation of resources when it comes to preventing coronavirus spread.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, Matt. The whole difference between facts and publicity. I think that we are all bombarded pretty regularly with, hey, I just read, or, oh, I just saw, or somebody told me. So it is a hard balance to achieve. As safety professionals, I have found that kind of trying to do a broad education on some of the more specific topics helps in our community to sort of balance that out. Trying to help to educate our facilities management people, for example. I'm not sure about the rest of you, but one of the favorite phrases I kept hearing at the very beginning of the pandemic or the outbreak was, hey, you know what? Come here. Our buildings are safe, they're clean, and that makes them safe. Interesting, cleaning is great, but when the source is actually people, I think the only thing that makes them safe is the fact that there were no people here. So I think that is a challenge that we've had. And so then when it comes to the differences between the cleaning and the disinfecting, and are we sterilizing, and antiseptics and all those things, all of those terminologies and doing that education has really helped us to balance that out. And then finally, trying to communicate to our community that the process of cleaning and disinfection is one portion of a larger process for controlling the source or controlling the hazard. That we can't really rely just on one thing. It's not a single strategy. Each group on campus for us, and we are not a medical facility here, so this was a little bit more challenging for us. I think some of the medical facilities had a better opportunity to understand some of these terms. But our challenge was that, you know, each different group wanted to focus on their area of control. So facilities was very interested in cleaning and sanitizing and disinfecting and all of these things, where other groups might have been less interested. And so just trying to balance those communications, I think, was our approach.
And of course, if any of our other panelists would like a quick chance to respond here before we move on, feel free to jump in.
No, that was great.
Pretty much covers it. We are a large university with a medical center, so we had a little bit of a different perspective, I think. But in terms of our main campus, there were, especially at the beginning, there was a lot of emphasis on cleaning, and I think I noticed at least one question in the Q&A that said, you know, there's sort of like, there was a push to fog everything or something like that was coming through, and maybe in places where it really wasn't necessary, or, you know, it was more of a fear response rather than than something that was based on the data.
Yeah, managing the fear response, I think, is just going to be an ongoing challenge here, no matter what the topic is at hand. So to move on here, looks like, Aristea, are you still with us? Okay, looks like we had a little blip here. Oh, sorry?
Yes, I'm still, I'm on my, the reason I'm connected on my phone is I can still hear you. So if the place that I'm at has a little bit of an issue sometimes with the connection, but I can still hear when people are speaking.
Okay, great. Well, next question is coming your way. So I was wondering if there are any particular groups where you found success empowering them to own the disinfection process.
Yes, actually. So, so my particular focus in EH&S is research safety, and as you know, right now research is very critical. So we've been trying to work and balance the need to keep research going when, you know, but also to protect people, especially when now the risk is not just, you know, the materials that they work with, but other laboratorians. So one of the first issues that came up was in hazardous materials laboratories, it's difficult to send either a cleaning company or our custodial in there to do a decontamination when there's potentially sensitive equipment, when there's materials that custodial may not be comfortable encountering, or they think, you know, if we go into, because we have other, infectious disease labs and other biological materials labs. So one of the very first things, one of the very first SOPs actually that I worked on was and that's, I think that's changed a little bit now, but one of the very first SOPs that I worked on was actually an SOP to empower laboratorians to go into their spaces and to use the chemicals and disinfectants that they have within those spaces that they would use to disinfect, just normally, to clean spaces where they thought that somebody had been in there who was sick. Maybe they didn't have, we don't know for certain if they had tested positive, but they were showing symptoms or something like that. There was an emphasis on empowering people to actually take control of their own spaces and clean them in a way that kept themselves safe, and to know that a lot of the same kinds of PPE and chemical disinfectants that they had already available and that they knew how to use could be used for this as well. And that just because this was a novel pathogen, that didn't mean that it wasn't susceptible to disinfection.
Yeah, that has come up in many conversations I've seen. It's not a super bug, fortunately. It may not even be in the higher echelon of particularly resilient viruses external to the body. So thank God for small favors, huh? Right. And Megan, a question for you. I was wondering, this is going to come up, I'm sure, plenty in the Q&A, but what advice do you offer individuals who are looking to purchase UV or disinfecting devices?
Short answer, don't waste your money, but long answer, long answer would be, there are so many problems with UV disinfection. Does UV kill coronavirus? Yes, it does. UV does kill lots. Well, okay, kill would be the wrong word for viruses, but it inactivates. But UV works on lots of pathogens, but you have to worry about light and shadows. You have to worry about distance. You have to be fairly close to the surfaces. You have to worry about energy amounts depending on the pathogen. You have to worry about the energy. The lamps themselves, you have to be very careful. There can't be any dust on your lamps. You have to worry about replacement. Lamp loses 50% of its power within 12 months. So if you aren't replacing that lamp within 12 months, really you should replace it every 6 to 9 months if you really want it to work well. Then of course the users, you don't want them to get burns. And then exposure time. Most validation studies use minutes to hours of exposure time. So if you're watching any of those commercials where they're using those wands and they're flying across the room with those wands, using milliseconds of exposure time, yeah, that's not true. Can you imagine how slow you'd have to go with your wand across the surface so you actually get enough exposure time? Then UV also causes ozone creation, so you do have to worry about air quality for ozone. So yeah, it's just, yeah, don't waste your money, please. Do not waste your money on there are some applications for UV. There are some water treatment applications that UV actually does work quite well, but overall, they are not worth the time and effort and cost. I mean, the light replacement alone just is not worth it. I try not to even let them use them in our biosafety cabinets. So yeah, don't do it.
And the hazard to the user as well.
Oh yeah.
It's not insignificant.
No, the burn risk alone should, yeah, we had some people trying to get wands for their undergrads to use to disinfect their spaces. I'm like, don't put them in hands of undergrads under any circumstances. Yeah.
As somebody who has gotten a UV burn in the lab before, they are not fun. And then of course, you got folks who say, oh, but my UV is safe. It doesn't actually burn me. Look, and then you think, great, how is it going to actually damage the virus?
Yeah, if it's not burning you, it's not working.
Matt, if I could chime in, if you don't mind. I think,
Oh, please do.
Actually, I think that both of the answers that you just talked about are great because, and to tie them together a little bit, the concept of empowering some of our customers and also educating them about these things, I think go hand in hand. And we've got groups across campus that specialize in some of these things. And somebody did post a comment to the panelists about air filtration. We had our facilities management team come to us in regard to UV. They asked a couple questions. One was, hey, somebody marketed to us these UV lights that we want to install over the doors in the classrooms so that everybody who walked in would get a nice little dose of UV, and we could all hold our hands up and sing Kumbaya and walk past, and then we'd all be good to go. So we had a conversation about that, but I was able to move that conversation into the spectrum of, okay, so you guys, you're really invested in using UV. I'm probably not going to be able to talk you out of it because your facilities management, you want to do something, and realistically, they need to be empowered and invested in the solutions that they come up with. So, so the conversation moved on a little bit then to the opportunity to use some UV in the air filtration systems, where there is less of a hazard to the user. There is some potential benefit to the filters themselves. You're probably not going to find me saying there's a benefit to the air, but I will give you that there's a benefit to the filter treatment as it goes. As the air passes through the filter, you're probably minimizing secondary contamination being picked up in the airstream. So we were able to migrate to that thought process, and they have installed some of the UV filtration devices in our air handling units. And I think it helps. It helps them to feel that they have provided a solution. It may or may not be relevant for aerosol transmission of COVID and SARS, 1 or 2, or any of the upcoming SARS viruses. But what it does do is it does decrease a bacterial load on those filter banks. Okay with that, right? The less challenge we're putting on the immune systems of the occupants of our building, if we can decrease the bacterial load, maybe they'll be a little bit better positioned to fight off immunologically the load of a virus. I'm okay with that. That's fine. And it gives them a win. And as safety professionals, I think it helps us to let them know that we value their opinions and their inputs, and they are empowered to take those controls.
It probably decreases the mold load in the air filters too.
Mm-hmm. That's interesting. So the decision that was made on our end was actually more that I think they changed the MERV rating on some of the filters. So I think at least most of the buildings that were that had been built recently enough in which you could change the type of filter with a different MERV rating. Those changes were made, but we did not decide to add additional UV to our air handlers. I know that I was actually a little bit surprised that ASHRAE made that recommendation. I mean, it's one of those changes that I don't think necessarily hurts anything, but I was a little bit startled that they actually came out and said, yes, you should do this, because it doesn't seem like the cost benefit, depending on how many buildings and how many air handlers you have to change, at least not for all institutions, would necessarily be particularly high.
I think one of the things we had to consider is that so when you change the MERV rating on the filters, you're putting more back pressure on your fans and your systems. And we have a lot of systems that run 24/7, especially in our research buildings. They're already taxed as far as mechanics go. We bought these systems hoping they would last, I don't know, somebody thought they were going to last 10 years. They're barely lasting 3 because, you think, oh, it's an office building, we're going to run it for 8 hours a day and then shut it down. No, we run it 24/7, full speed. And so sometimes increasing the MERV filtration rating is putting too much pressure on our systems. And so I think that for them, giving them the option of UV to help combat some of that, if we can't increase the filtration, perhaps we can just decrease the load going through the building. So,
yeah, we updated our filters as well.
To answer the question that I think just popped up in the chat, I believe it was MERV 14. I was working with our IH group, and they're the ones who made that determination.
Great. And this is a great chance to just sort of make another announcement quickly here. I've seen a few folks posting great questions in the chat, and I'd be very sad to have those get lost. The chat tends to move quickly. So if you have a question that you'd like for us to address during the live Q&A portion of the webinar, I'd recommend that you go over to the Q&A box down in your Zoom toolbar and ask it there. There you can thumbs up the questions you're most interested in, which we can use to guide us towards how we prioritize answering questions. You can also have some back and forth where you're able to respond to other folks' questions and not wait for us to address something that is interesting to you. Moving on here, question for Joan and Aristea. I was wondering if you had different protocols in place for routine disinfection versus disinfection when an individual tests positive for coronavirus.
Yes, actually. So mostly the difference in protocols has to do with the difference in PPE that we recommend for someone when they enter into the space to conduct the cleaning. We recommend respiratory protection if there's a known positive. I mean, now everyone is wearing face coverings, but we still recommended surgical masks in the case of if the status was unknown. But in terms of an actual cleaning, like a different cleaning protocol, not so much. At least not in research laboratories. For instance, like we wouldn't, we never told anybody that they had to decontaminate the floors unless there was a known contamination on the floor or something, or they and also I think we recommend, if I'm trying to remember, I believe that we recommended a longer hold period. If someone was known to be positive, we implemented a 24-hour hold. So that allowed time, since we have single pass airflow, since we have the 8 air changes per hour, that gives us the time to sort of make sure that if there are aerosols in the space, they have cleared out of that area. And anyone who's entering into the spaces, then it decreases their risk.
Yeah, we here at UT Dallas, we sat down with our Office of Emergency Management and Continuity Planning, who honestly is really running pretty much everything now because we are still in an emergency response type mode. We're still operating under our pandemic plan. So we work closely with them. Our group does handle if there's a chemical spill, for example, on campus, we have an outside contractor that would come in and help us deal with that. And so our group got to play a part in that. And we actually developed a decision tree for responses to any of the occupied areas where somebody who either had tested positive or was a presumptive positive due to symptoms. And that decision tree involves a couple of the things that were just discussed, things like how long has it been since the individual occupied their space? Did they clean their space before they left? We have distributed a significant number of disinfectant materials to both our administrative staff that are here as essential personnel, as well as our research staff who's here operating at a limited capacity. So everybody has a disinfectant that they've been provided for their work areas. And they are cleaning their areas daily before they leave. So that helps out a lot. So we look at the time that's passed, we look at what cleaning has already occurred. Again, was it a symptomatic individual, a positive test, or a close contact? We also do a follow-up if there's a close contact identified. In most of the situations, our custodial team is following up. They are using an electrostatic sprayer to disseminate a hydrogen peroxide-based disinfectant. And so they will follow up in those areas, although not in the research laboratories. For our research labs, we do have some chemical incompatibilities, again, the high-end electronics, things like that. And so we are asking our researchers, our PIs and research groups to disinfect their own high-touch surfaces in a research lab area if those have been impacted. And then the common spaces, we would commonly have just our custodial group do that. We do have a third-party vendor on call, and I will tell you that we have called them to come and clean a few spaces. These are sort of what I would consider those higher risk areas, either because they absolutely can't be isolated or closed off for 24 hours because they have high use. They have a high volume of people in there. For example, if we were talking about our police department, those kinds of areas where we've had occupation the whole time, and you really can't keep the police out of the dispatch room. So for example, if there was something to happen there, that's when we would call a third-party vendor in. Other areas where we have a lot of public interaction, we do still have some places that have been open to the public. We have, although we're not a medical facility, we do have some patient areas where they come in for some evaluation. And so if we had an incident in a more public area, we would probably rely on our third-party vendor. They come in using a quaternary ammonia. They have a higher level of PPE that they wear, and we have a little bit more confidence that they're able to protect their staff against the hazards of the disinfectant that they're using.
Fantastic.
We also have access to a third-party vendor for more public spaces, so spaces outside of the research laboratories. We've brought them in, I think, sometimes, but we also have a custodial team that's enrolled in our respiratory protection program, and they have been deployed, and they seem to be on the ball with it. So since they're already enrolled in the respiratory protection program, they didn't seem to have a problem. There was no concern that going into the spaces and decontaminating.
Yeah, that's a great point. At the beginning of all of this, we have a fantastic occupational hygiene and safety manager on our team who did a great deal of training and education to bring our custodial team under our respiratory program. So they felt much more comfortable as well, and were then qualified to go ahead and protect themselves when doing some of the electrostatic spraying that we're doing here. That's a great point. Thank you.
Fantastic.
To answer, I think it's Kalpana. Predominantly, we use non-bleach disinfectants on campus. So there's a couple of waxy formulations, one which is a quaternary ammonia and one which is a hydrogen peroxide base that has a shorter contact time. I think it's, I want to say it's 703 and 701, but don't quote me on that. 710, sorry, 710 and 703. Sitting here inverting numbers in my head.
You can use any of the EPA enlists, so.
Fantastic. So to just keep things moving along here, I think we're going to have no shortage of questions or anything in the live Q&A portion here. Megan, I had a question for you. So I was wondering what areas you were most concerned about for disinfection and which areas you were least concerned about.
Well, to be honest, I think that as we go on, I get less and less concerned about surfaces, to be perfectly honest. But since really it's the air that I get concerned about, but it's really as we bring our students on, it's going to be our classrooms and those desks. So I'm going to be most concerned about how we're going to keep the desks from being soiled by our students, and how they're going to be disinfected and between class changes. That's really what I'm most concerned about, because while we're going to have disinfectant materials available for between classes, and we plan on having them take care of this between classes by the teachers and students, and hope everyone does what they're supposed to do. That expects everyone to do what they're asked, and we all know how that actually works. So there's that. But thankfully, we don't think that it's really a big fomite transfer, so that's a positive. And most of our rooms are at 10 air exchanges per hour. So at 10 air exchanges per hour, that makes me pretty confident that our main way of transmission is going to be cut down considerably. So that makes me pleased. That gives me a little breathing room, so to speak.
Always seems like it's about finding those silver linings of, okay, it's not the most resilient. Surfaces don't be as much of an issue. Children seem to be more resilient. Just
Exactly.
things that you hold on to.
Exactly. So we have, our rooms are like wind tunnels. So so that's good. So, and really fomite transmission seems really rare. So given that, disinfection, and let's face it, COVID doesn't really survive well at all. It's pretty, as far as viruses go, it's pretty wimpy. So that's a plus for us, which is good. So we gotta hold on to that silver lining. So yeah, yay. But yeah, when students come, having them convene in classes and put their hands on everything and touch their faces, and because supposedly they'll have their mask on the whole time, but they're going to be touching their faces and touching those desks.
Yeah. Just to build off your comment about discussing sort of spaces and fomites not being as much of a concern, are bathrooms something that you think of as a special consideration or a particular area of risk or a particular challenge in terms of keeping clean or safe?
I would say so, especially since feces is probably an area of transmission. So yeah, I would say that bathrooms would be a higher risk area for sure. So as often as those can be disinfected and cleaned, they need to be disinfected and cleaned. So yeah, I would say absolutely they are definitely an area of concern. Yeah.
I would like to chime in just briefly on the bathroom issue, just because this has also come up, and while final determinations haven't been made, there was a question about installing of basically toilet lids on the flush mount style toilets that tend to be used in large facilities like universities, and overwhelmingly that has been decided against. So I know that there's been some question about aerosolization of material, but I think that at least on our end, what was being pushed back against was that it was essentially creating another surface which would have to be touched by the user and also then have to be disinfected. So it came down to sort of balancing that out. I don't know if you guys had a similar conversation.
We haven't, but I can honestly say that unfortunately I'm not included on many conversations on my campus. So yeah.
I think it's a good point though, looking at the risk versus the reward, right? As safety professionals, we have to do this every day. And we hear a lot of suggestions from our customers and from our stakeholders and our partners about what we should or shouldn't be doing across campus. And I think a lot of times bouncing those questions back to the people that are asking them and asking them to look at that in sort of that risk assessment, that risk reward type of an environment is helpful to work through some of these questions. One of the questions that came up for us early on, which somewhat relates to bathrooms, is about air dryers versus paper towels. And this has been a long running conversation in academia, as well as other places. And so because there isn't a lot of definitive, and we've all seen the Mythbusters show, right? I mean, I watched it. Let's admit it, we watched the thing. So they've done it. They've done the Mythbusters thing on the hand, the air hand towels and air drying and the differences and things like that. But I think when it comes right down to it, you know, we ended up as a university making a decision to install hand towel paper dispensers in our restrooms that did not have them. We only had a few buildings that were void of these. And it's a hard conversation, right? You have it's not sustainable. It's, you know, using paper towels over and over and over again, it's not that sustainable. But now we've come to this, well, we want people to disinfect their surfaces. And we tell them that the best way to do that, if you're going to use a spray disinfectant, is to spray onto the disposable towel and wipe and then throw that away. So now the argument between, do we use paper towels in the bathrooms or do we just stay with hand dryers, almost becomes a moot point. And so, you know, pandemic, we're going to put paper towels in the bathrooms. 2 years from now, we might have the conversation again, and maybe the reward does not outweigh the risk. And so, you know, we go away from that again. But I think that's a really good way to look at all of these issues. And Matt, your table over here with the pros and cons, risk reward, right? That's really what we're looking at is what kinds of things do we want to use? Why do we want to use them? Is it beneficial in some circumstances? I saw somebody posted in the chat, have you had issues with hydrogen peroxide, fogging, or electrostatic spraying, chemical incompatibility or reactions? We may well have. The reality is that if we are starting to use these disinfectants on surfaces every day, day in, day out, we might end up seeing some compatibility issues in the long term, some surface degradation in the long term. We, unless we're in a healthcare setting, we're really not used to applying this to our surfaces on a regular basis. And so we may see some adverse outcomes from all the application of disinfectants over and over and over again. You know, carpeting might have to be replaced sooner. You know, your desk laminations may begin delaminating. There aren't many of us in this academia world that have solid wood desks. Mine certainly is not. Or laminated. Guess what holds that on? Glue. Guess what's affected by glue? Or what's affected by disinfectants? Glue. So, you know, we have all these things to consider. And so I think that this chart that Matt's got up is amazing because it's a good beginning look at some of the things you have to consider when you're weighing out all these things. And it isn't just one question, what's going to work best on our campus? It really is what's going to work best in each area, and what are the things we need to think about when we try to employ those methods?
Yeah, because nothing's going to work for every single lab. I mean, even you can't, campus-wide is, I mean, it's not even a single building. You can't even go building-wide, much less campus-wide, because what will work in one lab won't work in the lab next door. So, yeah.
It's that finding that right mix of technology, application, and also behavior modification. One of the great things that I remember hearing a long time ago, I think maybe even on a Shark Tank or on an old show called American Inventor, somebody had, before toilet plumes spread virus, they were still an issue. So they had a little screen they put down on the toilet before you flush to catch the plume, and they kicked the idea out because they said this requires too much of a change from normal behavior, and no matter, even though it solves the problem and it's effective and it's cost effective, it's a great idea, it's never going to get used because it requires too much behavior change. And just again, finding that perfect intersection, that like triple point, is so hard, but I think we're all working towards that, definitely. We're about to transition over to the live Q&A portion, so I'm going to go ahead and just remind everybody that we've got a few webinars coming up. Next one coming up next week, it's coming up fast. We'll be focused on contact tracing. Then we've got coronavirus safety and teaching labs. I know this is one that's been on everybody's minds, how you can actually manage to get people safely taught in those situations where e-learning is a little bit more difficult. And our newest one, an impact of COVID-19 on risk assessments. This one will be coming up in early September, talking about how risk assessments have changed with the advent of COVID. And I'm launching a poll right now for everybody to take, if you don't mind just hopping on and answering a few questions. We want these webinars to serve you. That means that we need to know about what topics you're interested in. As you can see, we have these really wonderful panelists with us today, and that's a huge thank you to them for lending their time and to keep these webinars going. We do need folks to volunteer and to let us know if they're available or if they're interested. We can make sure that we find a topic that's good for your strengths, and just being able to keep these going would be really fantastic. So having the community participation is really valued. And another quick reminder that as we get into the Q&A portion of our webinar, I'd recommend that everybody go in and go to the Q&A tab of the Zoom webinar functionality. Even if you're not going to be asking a question, you can still scroll through the questions that have already been asked, and you can read other people's replies. You can thumbs up the questions you're most interested in. That ensures that we'll be able to address things you want to hear about, and also you'll be able to respond to each other's questions. So if we're busy answering one question, you can have a side conversation and still get what you'd like shared or addressed. Right, I'm going to leave that poll up for a little while longer while we move on to our first question. So I'm just going to kind of go through here from the top, and we can work our way down. And feel free, of course, if you are scrolling through the Q&A, you find something that you think is particularly interesting, go ahead and flag that one and let me know, and we can address that afterwards, or once we're ready. So the first question here is from Mary. She'd like some advice for dealing with the super panicky faculty who want to disinfect everything, rock samples, probably boxes, etc. Just wondering how you kind of calm those nerves and help connect people with factual information.
I think to start with, I'm gonna pull back a little bit from the COVID-19 picture and maybe go into a little bit of the psychosocial picture here. And I think it's helpful for all of us to understand that a lot of our faculty are operating out of fear, and a lot of them are operating, they realistically are traumatized by the thought that they could be providing an environment where the students that they are committed to educating and somewhat protecting may be exposed to something in their environment that is going to be dangerous for them. I take the approach of empowerment. I have a conversation with them. I provide them with the tools and the resources to make the best decision for them and their area. If they want advice on what kind of disinfectant they can use and something that can be used every day on everything, we have to have a conversation about the fact that nothing can be used on everything every day, and try and pull back a little bit and help them to focus on the overall picture and a multifaceted strategy for controlling their environment. Disinfection is part of that. It isn't all of that.
I think I'd also like to say I think that the pandemic has resulted in quite a number of people questioning a lot of things that they know, and so whereas they might normally consider, oh, this is just regular systems, normal SOP. All of a sudden, they said, oh no, we've got this pandemic that's going on. How does this intersect with how I would operate in my laboratory normally? I haven't had any particular contact with faculty who have been like this, but one instance that really stuck out to me was one of the questions that we got was, how do we handle transcripts? We're going to be getting hundreds and hundreds of transcripts. Should we get a UV light? Do we need to disinfect all of these transcripts? And being able to show data is really helpful. I know that there was at least one paper that actually that was released that was looking at viral survival on surfaces. That seemed to make a difference. Being able to point to the data and say, hey, no, we actually do have an understanding of how long that this can survive on paper. No, you don't need to UV everything in the office. If you want to comfort, to lower the risk perception and sort of, you can implement a hold, when you receive your transcripts. And in that case, I mean, UV would have really, I suppose, been the only option in terms of material compatibility. But I think once we started explaining to people and offering them, sort of data to back up, that no, they didn't, suddenly the transcripts weren't suddenly far more dangerous than they had been, in previous years. that really seemed to calm people down.
All right, moving on here. Don was wondering if we have had several inquiries about using vapor disinfectant systems for classes and labs. I don't think it's necessary, but I'd like to hear others' advice. Megan, do you have any thoughts on using those systems for disinfecting these places?
I'm sorry, can you repeat? I was reading a question while you were talking.
No problem, I know the feeling. Don was wondering, we have had several inquiries about using vapor disinfecting systems for classes and labs. I don't think that it's necessary, but would like to hear others' advice.
I don't think they're probably necessary. If I think it's going overboard, honestly. If they wanted to do a full-on disinfection of a lab, I guess you could, but I don't think it's probably necessary for this particular agent. We would do them for a select agent lab if you had to shut down the lab to get people in there, but for just a regular cleaning of a lab, I wouldn't do it for this as just a regular cleaning of a lab. I think that's probably overboard, to be honest.
There might be some things that would prohibit using it. Some of the vapor disinfecting systems, some of the fogging systems. I don't know specifically which one you're asking about, Don, but I'll kind of address it broadly. The way that these things are used, and I think somebody had put a question into the chat as well about the companies that are out there that are really pushing the fogging systems. Oh, hey, you know, we can come in and fog. Great. This happened with mold too. I don't know if anybody's as old as I am, but this happened with mold a long time ago where a bunch of companies decided they could come in and do either hydrogen peroxide or some other reactive, or sometimes ozone, or sometimes a chemical fog. Boy, when you do that, you have to be able to isolate the area. You have to be able to isolate the ventilation system. You have to apply the product. It has to sit for a certain amount of time before you can enter the area. And then sometimes you have to go in and wipe afterwards, and you have to wipe every surface that it got on. And so these are not always the best things in terms of what we need. There are instances when this is appropriate. TB isolation rooms in a hospital, they fog them frequently. But for a classroom or a laboratory where you may have even more of the reactive things, if I went to any of our chemists and told them I was going to put anything in the air of their laboratory, they would rapidly hustle me out of the lab, and I'm not sure they would listen to anything I had to say for the next 2 years. So there are opportunities for this. Classrooms, I also agree. I can't see how this would provide a benefit, and I'm not sure that it's actually a viable method. Electrostatic spraying might be a little bit better option. This is using not only the chemical, a less reactive chemical, by the way. There are some green chemicals, if you will, although I'm not sure any of them are really green, that you could put into an electrostatic sprayer. You do have electrostatic action as well, so you have another action there. They do go through and physically wipe, so you get the cleaning and the mechanical action first, and then you do the electrostatic spraying, so you really have a double action here. It's short term, it doesn't require isolation, and it typically can be done by your regular custodial staff.
But yeah, a whole room, I mean, unless you have dampers that can shut off the room, and yeah, it's not really it's not really feasible or necessary, really. So
Fortunately, I think getting back to that point about foam ice not being as much of a concern, just not as necessary as much of an extreme measure compared to other tools available.
right.
Great. Yeah, so here's a question from William. He's wondering, what are the best or safest methods for cleaning delicate electronics like film cameras and sound equipment? Sound equipment especially sounds like a great one. You've got mics right up next to people's faces. Could actually be a place where there would be some concern.
Tricky.
Yeah.
Got the top comment here saying, in my search from Tamara, saying that she had mostly found 70% alcohol wipes to be the best for services of electronic devices, ensuring that they're not too saturated with liquids and that liquids don't enter sensitive areas or openings of the device. That could also be a situation. That could also be a situation potentially where time is a really great option. Just put it aside, you know, again, it's sometimes I think we get to this, we talked about it in a previous webinar, getting so focused on disinfection that you forget there are other controls in place to solve the same problem. And that being able to default to isolating something for a certain amount of time can sometimes be a really great option instead of going deep into the weeds on disinfectant things that don't cause short circuits or might not harm delicate electronics. Just put it in a box for a while.
Right. Yeah. You know, in 24 hours, it's going to be done anyways. So.
Tasha had a great comment, providing instructors with their own personal mics, so that way they all have their own PAs and mics and you're not sharing things. Another great way to control that without necessarily going straight for the disinfection.
Yeah.
Yep, distance is another thing that you might want to think about if you're talking about microphones. There's some really pretty good, room size technology where you can have room pickup mics as opposed to personal mics where you have to put them right by your face, things like that. So yeah, thinking outside the box a little bit, where again, that's a great point, Matt, is that again, we do get focused on the one thing of how can I clean that? Well, first ask, do I need to clean it? And then if you have to, then let's get to, okay, then how do I clean it? But sometimes time, distance, things like that, you can prevent it from having to be cleaned.
Looking down the line here, got a question from Lindsay. She said she was interested in hearing what commercially made cleaning products used for disinfection or cleaning of potentially infected or contaminated surfaces people have been able to actually find in stock in large quantities, and what distributors people have been using to purchase these from. So I know this is the biggest thing is supply chain, actually finding reliable sources that work. Have you all found any particular successes with particular products or distributors?
We partnered early on with our procurement team and put them to task. Here in Texas, UT system, we have 14 sister institutions, and they early on went together to kind of identify some reliable distributors. The safety team worked with them to identify some reliable products and manufacturers. And so we went with the suppliers that could provide us with products most reliably and safely that we knew were vetted somewhat through our other institutions. You might want to reach out to some of your sister institutions. We have found that the manufacturer that we're using the most here is Ecolab products and Flowchem, K-E-M, F-L-O-K-E-M. Those are the products that we mostly have here. We've got Diversey supplying some of our products as well, like our Virex. We have some Virex here on site. So those are probably the main manufacturers of chemical products that we're using for cleaning and disinfecting here at UT Dallas.
Unfortunately, I don't know who we're ordering through. I know we're able to get products, but I don't know who they're getting them.
I'm pretty much in the same boat. I work somewhat with procurements, but mostly only to evaluate. If they send, they'll send a disinfectant product sheet my way and say, would this work for what we need it to? So unfortunately, I don't have a good answer in terms of, but yeah, supply chain is a hot topic right now.
So we got a great question down here from Susanna. Susanna was wondering, what is the level of interaction among decision makers at your universities? Are they listening to you, and what are the most significant barriers to carrying out your recommendations?
I wish I had a good answer, but I am not involved in any of the decision making.
So I'm somewhat involved. I was drawn in for a while to our emergency operations center, and that was basically how I had contact. And And also because I mean, if once upper management realizes that they have people whose expertise is in biosafety and in environmental health, some of them will reach out to you, but I guess not all the time.
Not at all.
So here at UT Dallas, we have been involved from the get-go as one of the primary stakeholders in this response. Again, our Office of Emergency Management did a wonderful job of partnering with the administration to understand that this really was an emergency response situation. And so the administration here at UT Dallas has included the safety team in those conversations across the different campus groups. We have working groups for academic continuity, research continuity, administrative continuity. One thing we haven't talked about on this call, which I think is important for everyone to remember, if you have residential on your campus, we do. Our housing folks have been incredibly involved in this conversation. And that's a whole different approach to cleaning and disinfection when you're relying on the students to clean and disinfect in their own units. And then we have our staff that might have to enter or go behind. We have quarantine units, things like that. So we have been involved from the beginning, and I think that, I'm trying to look at the comment over here. I think that getting yourself included in the conversation is a matter of relationship building, and kind of balancing out some of that. What can I do for you, and how can I help you? But you have to understand that not every piece of advice that you give is going to be taken with the same level of importance. Risk management is a broad topic, and it goes much beyond the management of safety and health hazards. There are reputational risks, there's economic risks, there are other things that some of the decision makers have to include. And so I have seen some of our safety and health peers excluded from conversations because those other risk factors took precedence. And depending on your administration's tolerance for risk in any of those areas, whether it's reputational risk or others, litigation risk is another big area. Keep in mind that some of our safety best practices that we recommend are above and beyond what the federal regulators are recommending. It is hard to sell that to your legal team. They need to be able to say, I did what the federal agencies recommended. And you can't sit in court and say, yeah, I know better than the federal agencies, so that's why we did this. That's a really difficult position to be in. And if any of you have sat in a deposition before, kudos to you if you were able to defend that position. And so it's a really big picture. It's a hard conversation to be included in, but I would encourage you to add your information, your advice, your 2 cents when asked.
And I think the relationship aspect is very important there. Great point. Just, wondering, okay, well, if I'm not in these conversations and I should be, and there's no expert, where's that expertise coming? And just asking seemingly innocuous questions that have very clear answers of, oh, for the smart people in the room, hopefully they'll realize, yeah, we should get going. That's a great idea. So just before we move on, we are at the 4 o'clock mark. The time has really flown by, and we still have a ton of questions here. So we normally ask if our panelists are able to stay on for an extra 15 minutes just to keep answering them. We'd love to have you, but of course we understand if you need to jump. So a huge thank you to all of you for lending your time. And if you're able to stay, that would be fantastic to keep going.
I have another meeting, so I will, anyone can email me if you'd like. My email is posted, so feel free. But have a great day.
Great. Thanks. See you later, Megan. Thanks for joining.
I unfortunately also have another meeting that I'm going to need to step out, but my email is also included, and people are welcome to email me. I also, I may have said it wrong. I think it was MERV 13. I was only partially involved in that decision. That was predominantly our IH team. So I think that there were some questions that showed up in the chat about a MERV 14. I believe it is actually 13, which you are correct. That was the recommendation.
Well,
but, thank you very much for having me.
Yeah, thank you so much for joining, and really appreciate the support here.
I'd be happy to stay on for a little longer, Matt.
Okay, great. Well, let's get this kicked off then. There's a question here from Jessica saying, I'm curious where you got the 24-hour survival time from. This article in the New England Journal of Medicine can found up to 72 hours on plastic and stainless steel. And she links to, I think, the classic early on NEJM article that we've all seen a few times here. Let me see if I can actually just pull that up for everybody to take a look at so that there's some context. But yeah, talking about the air solubility and the stability back from people. So I think this has been a pretty important article that's generally been informing a lot of the way that people have responded to COVID. And just referencing this, you know, I don't know if you can speak to the 24-hour survival time or if that's something that you hadn't been as thinking about.
So I wish I was a research expert. I really do like to do research on things. Unfortunately, I just don't have the time to do my current job and do any research. So realistically, I can't speak at all to the papers or the research on survival times. I can tell you that the 24 hours that we use is actually more based not on 24 hours of survival time on a surface. It's more about 24 hours to allow the aerosolized virus to evacuate from the area before we go in and actually do any cleaning of the surfaces. According to the CDC, cleaning of surfaces after this 24-hour period presents a low risk for exposure transmission. And so that actually is the 24 hours that I commonly refer to. I have seen a lot of the different information that's out, starting with the, what was it, the Princess Cruise?
Oh, the Princess Emerald, I think it was.
Or Diamond,
yeah,
whichever
Diamond,
one it
yeah.
was. You know, oh, we found viral RNA, you know, viable up to 17 days later. And that was where we started with this thing was, oh, great, now do we have to keep areas empty for 17 days? But to go back to the 24 hours specifically, that cut point is typically what we're using, as we feel that after 24 hours, the ventilation has been adequate to remove the aerosolized viral particles that may actually cause infection from the air.
Great, that's a fantastic reframe there. So here, let me go ahead before I get this. I'm just gonna go ahead and copy that link into the chat for the folks who haven't seen it, but also definitely I'd recommend take a look at our Q&A. These things are posted there. They're in different tabs, so great to have that as a reference. And question below, I'm not sure if this is within your wheelhouse, so let me know if it's a little outside of your scope, but Lisa was wondering about the efficacy of SAO, stabilized aqueous ozone.
I have absolutely no experience or knowledge about that, I'm sorry.
Okay, no problem. This is actually a great chance for the folks who are here to go ahead, scroll through, and if you find Lisa's question and know a little bit about SAO, you can go ahead and type answers and have a side conversation as we move on through the rest of our questions. So I'm just gonna scroll through our Q&A here. I was wondering if, okay, it looks like Don has a question up top. Wondering about classrooms, lecture halls, labs, teaching and research, understanding and trying to figure out how to disinfect spaces quickly after each class period, whether there are any technologies or strategies that you have found to be particularly promising for that concern.
So again, honestly, I think you have to look at each different circumstance. Here we have built in disinfection periods. They've limited the class sizes. They have limited travel paths and things like that. And our custodial team actually will be in cleaning, not doing the electrostatic spraying, but actually doing cleaning and surface wiping with a disinfectant product in between the class periods. They've tried to stagger scheduling and you know, accommodate that way. So any classrooms that I think, again, can sit for a certain period of time before reoccupancy, they're trying to figure that into the plan as well. We have 5 different modalities of teaching being presented this fall. Face-to-face, 100% face-to-face is one, and that's really not the option that most faculty have chosen. So we have decreased the capacity of most of our classrooms and have increased the cleaning times in between. For our research labs, we actually have a scheduling system currently where we build a disinfection time slot in between each cohort of research members that sign up for their time slots. So there is time allowed there. The lab members do their own disinfection.
Looking down here, we have one from James. James is wondering, when establishing disinfection standard operating procedures, what are the key issues to be considered during these discussions? And then I'm just going to build off of that, just from my own experiences, trying to do these sorts of discovery conversations where you're trying to understand what you're designing for. What are the good questions that you can be asking to help guide those conversations to uncover the important requirements you need to meet when you're designing these procedures and protocols?
So I think I'm going to use a cheat sheet. I went out and I have this list that I have developed, and I'd be happy to share. This actually comes from the CDC, from some of the healthcare guidance for disinfectants. But you want to, the things that you really want to consider is it a broad spectrum disinfectant technique? Is it fast acting? What is the potential effect by environmental factors, whether that is dirt on the surface or temperature or other things like that? How toxic is it? What are the surface compatibilities you're looking at? Is there any residual effect? We didn't talk about that in this webinar, but I think that's important. There are some things that you can disinfect with that have a residual disinfection. For 24 hours or so, they will be not 100% antimicrobial, but they will be somewhat preventative. Are they easy to use? Do they have clear labeling on their on how to use them? Is it something that's going to be difficult for people? I put this in the category of, if you're going to use a concentrate, everybody better be really clear on how much goes in. If it's a 1 to 4, what does that mean? Does that mean 1 part of disinfectant to 4 parts water, or does it mean 1 part disinfectant to 3 parts water for a total of 4? People get confused about that. How's it smell? Is it odorless? Is it economical? Is it water soluble? How are you going to get rid of it if there's waste? How stable is it over time? Does it have good cleaning properties? And really, is it a sustainable way for you to disinfect surfaces?
And also perhaps adding in how much behavior change is that going to require? Understanding that those are going to be really large barriers and you can make something as effective as possible. But if you've got to click a few more buttons or do something that's really far outside of your task, people will probably end up avoiding it. It's a very unfortunate reality of being a human. Okay. Another question down here, coming in from Michael, specifically for you, Joan. Michael was wondering if your custodial are using Vitalox.
No, that's not a product we're using that I know of.
Okay. Okay, and let's go ahead and keep searching for a good question. If anything calls out to you, feel free to raise that one up. And then Teresa was wondering about the decision tree that you mentioned that you were using. Is that something that you'd be able to share with the attendees after the webinar?
Yes. Yep, we can send that out. I can send that to you, Matt, and you can figure out the best way to disseminate that. I would be happy to share that out.
Just making a quick note here. Teresa, we will get that posted up on the site and just figure out a good way to get that out and let everybody know that it's available for.
Somebody was asking about the filtration again. You know, the business of filtration is something that has come up across a lot of different conversation groups. It comes up in the respirator conversation, it comes up in the face covering conversation, it comes up in the air filtration conversation, it comes up just about everywhere. I just think it's important, and I will not give you my professional nor my personal opinion on filtration and its efficiency for protecting either against the virus or spreading the virus. But here's what I will tell you. When you're thinking of filtration, remember that it's not just about the pore size of the filter. Filters have a lot of different mechanisms of action. There's deflection, there's electrostatic attraction, there's all kinds of things that go into the nature of filtration. And so it's not just how big or small that a virus is and whether or not it could fit through a pore. There are many other things to be considered in that conversation. And so I will tell you that I have seen a lot of the white papers and the research and the quasi-research and the opinions on filters and whether they work or not. I would just encourage everyone to look at all the different properties that go into a filtration device.
Great. We've got just a few seconds left. Joan, was there anything else that you wanted to add or share before we get going?
No, really, I don't. I think there have been really great questions here. I am a huge proponent for being a safety champion in everything you do and building up the people around you to be safety champions as well. It's a culture of safety and empowering folks. I'm so glad you introduced that term into the conversation, Matt, early on, because realistically, we just don't know everything, and we've got to rely on other people, and we have to trust them to be experts in what they're experts in. And if we can empower them to not just do the safest thing or the most healthy thing today because of COVID, to actually build that in, I think we have a great opportunity as environmental health and safety professionals to start this conversation about considering these effects, the safety effects, the health effects of these things we want to go out and do from the ground, floor up, and letting our customers come to us at the beginning of the conversation instead of trying to fix things on the back end. So I think that everybody who has posted these questions and all these thoughtful topics to think about, thank you for bringing those all up, and thanks, Matt, for this opportunity.
Absolutely. And I just want to add to that to say everybody here is doing a fantastic job. This is a really hard time to just be a person, especially somebody in safety, setting policies, trying to forge ahead and keep people safe. Thank you to you all for all the work you do. Huge thank you to our panelists, even though they're not all here, for lending their time to this webinar series. It's really great to have you on. It's a fantastic crowd this time. And I hope to see everybody next week for our next webinar on contact tracing. And after that, coronavirus safety and teaching labs, and COVID effects on risk assessments. So I will see you all later. Have a great weekend, and stay safe, everyone.